Now it's late September. We're back in school and we'll remember the cure for those wintertime blues. Grab your girl, hit the road, head on down to the beach. You'll be coming home with sand in your shoes, just trying to keep the summer alive. Welcome back, Beach Boys fans. About a month ago, I did a review of 1992's Summer in Paradise, pointing out that it really isn't as bad as everyone makes it out to be. The album actually has a few strengths and a few pros that I think should maybe encourage people to re-evaluate it, to look at it for what it's trying to do and how it fulfills its mission of being a successful summertime soundtrack, fun album. And that led me to think, why don't I talk about another album that tends to get pretty short shrift in the Beach Boys catalog? And by that, I mean 1980's Keepin the Summer Alive. And what better time to talk about Keepin the Summer Alive than the beginning of fall. And the last vestiges of summer, the last warm days, are quickly disappearing. So in my Summer in Paradise video, I talked about how the album's biggest strength is that it feels cohesive. It feels organized, it all feels planned, everything feels like it was recorded and produced for this particular album. This is actually kind of a rarity in the Beach Boys catalog because a lot of their albums are kind of just scattered collections of whatever. Maybe that's why there aren't a lot of Beach Boys regular studio LPs that have been very successful sellers. With the early stuff, it's not, a big deal because when you think about it, a lot of other groups had kind of these random, low-effort, heavy filler LPs that, whatever. It wasn't like they were trying to make a big statement. Yes, these albums were very commercially successful, but in terms of artistic packages, it's only the few like Today and Pet Sounds that feel like cohesive products. Some scattered Beach Boys albums actually work better for being scattered, like 1969's 2020. Every song on here, or at least almost every song on here, is totally different and unrelated to everything else. But it serves as the best example of the group's ability to do a lot of different things. And 2020 shows just how incredibly diverse and how incredibly talented the group was. After the 1970s, kind of an experimental time for the group, I should say the early 1970s, and as an experimental time, the late 70s were trying to become relevant again and remain successful. Endless Summer and whatnot had propelled them to the top of the charts and to the #1 touring act in the nation. But if you look at their late 70s albums, such as 15 Big Ones and Love You, or from 1978 and 1979, MIU album and LA Light album, you kind of notice that these ones are mostly pieced together from bits of whatever. 15 Big Ones and Love You do a fair job of concealing this, I think. They have enough production behind them to make it feel at least fairly cohesive. But MIU and LA Light are both bits and bobs, odds and ends. Not that they aren't enjoyable albums, both are extremely enjoyable. Neither was particularly commercially successful, though both did produce a well-recognized, well-remembered single. But this trend would continue, and I think kind of climax in 1980, with perhaps the group's most random, most eclectic album, Keepin the Summer Alive. So Keepin the Summer Alive is really not talked about a lot when it comes to Beach Boys reviews and stuff. And when it is, it's either quickly dismissed or openly disparaged. I wouldn't say Keepin the Summer Alive is a bad album, but it's definitely kind of a hodgepodge, and I thought, well, let's look at why that is and see if there are other reasons why people just kind of skip over this one. I mean, we've seen before the Beach Boys have had hodgepodge random albums dating back to the beginning of their career, but these albums sold really well, even though they weren't cohesive packages. Why didn't this one? So let's actually start with the production, and a big important resource is this issue of Endless Summer Quarterly. This is a 2020 issue. It was to celebrate the album's anniversary there. Robert Lynn Nelson, the man who did the art for Summer in Paradise, did this mural, which you could purchase. I'll show you the back again. to kind of commemorate this album. But I was interested to read about the actual production, because I know in previous videos I've said how Keepin the Summer Alive could have been the group's last album. That's a view I stand by. But it seems like, reading the interviews and whatnot, that production was actually pretty positive and the group got along quite well. Dennis Wilson was barely involved. He was, of course, more interested in his solo stuff. Here's his unreleased solo album, Bamboo. Apparently, the constant companion song on here was considered for being a candidate for this Keepin the Summer Alive album, but was ultimately rejected. But barring his lack of participation, it seems like everybody kind of got along. Indeed, you can find online the 1980 documentary special Goin' Platinum, and the group is really positive, and everybody seems to be, on the same page. Everybody seems to be enjoying themselves. Everyone seems to see this as a big comeback for the group, but also a continuation of their career. And there are some great interviews there, and also some really bad lip syncing of them doing the tracks live for a concert. It's very obvious that they're lip syncing and not even really attempting to play their instruments. It's pretty funny. But on the other hand, there still were some production difficulties. Brian Wilson conceived this as a collection of rock and roll tracks, like covers, much as how half of 15 Big Ones had been classic rock covers. He kind of wanted to stick with that. That was vetoed, and eventually Bruce Johnston ended up in charge of production. But it seems like Bruce wasn't completely in charge, because Carl Wilson was able to override or challenge some of his decisions, and in the end he seems kind of disheartened by some of the directions that were taken. Randy Bachman was involved at one point, and perhaps the most weird thing and the most conspicuous thing, a lot of older songs were dug out of the vaults and reused on this LP, which is very strange. And I think it kind of contributes to the fact that it's almost like a too many cooks situation. I think even though everybody was on board for this and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves, I don't think everybody really had the same final vision in mind. So we get one random classic rock cover, we get 3 songs that were dug out of the vaults and dusted off. Some had more work done and rewrites and stuff. Others kind of went on, it seems, more or less as they were. And then we have some new stuff, for the singles and whatnot. But we'll talk about those in a little bit here. But in the end, it just feels like, even production-wise, that this thing's kind of scattered and random. Not that a scattered, random album can't work, but I think it hurts this one, because with that cover image and using the Keepin the Summer Alive song, the eponymous song, as the opener, you'd feel like this would be a joyful, kind of maybe teenage sort of themed summer break album, and it really isn't. We get a lot of love songs and ballads and some faux reggae with Sunshine and whatnot, that I don't think it quite had a vision or a finished product in mind. Another thing to talk about is its ultimate performance. None of the singles were especially successful, and really the album's biggest legacy is the Goin' On single. Here's the second single, Living with a Heartache, back with Santa Ana Winds. Goin' On peaked at number 83. It's a beautiful song, and it's probably the best thing on this album. But that being said, it just didn't resonate with audiences. The other singles, such as Living with a Heartache, which I just showed you, and School Days was considered as a single and mixed for a single, and we talk more about School Days in my 10 Years of Harmony video, the different mixes and whatnot, but that was being pushed as a single, didn't always necessarily get released as one, but those didn't really catch on. It's kind of odd that an album with, I think, a few potential singles didn't produce anything that people really remembered. Now, a big part of this album's release was to sort of recoup the failures of LA Light Album. LA Light Album had only peaked at number 100, but it did have a very successful single, technically 2, Good Timin' in the US and most other countries, and Lady Linda in the UK and Australia. But the odd thing is, it only peaked at 100. This peaked at 75, but it did not have any successful singles. So for some reason, maybe it was just a little too scattered or a little too maybe unexpected for people to really latch on. And I think the fact that no song resonated with a mass audience is further compounded by the fact that by 1981, a year later, there was really only one song from this album left in the Beach Boys live set. Here's their July 4th show. I have a whole video on this one too. This is one of those unofficial albums. School Days is the only one they're still doing in concert, and that was a cover. So very strange. So we have a scattered production and a scattered final product. We have no lead singles, nothing that really grabs the audience, no song that they could latch onto. Definitely a problem there. No real live staples. And the other thing I think we need to talk about is sort of the nostalgia factor. The only two major Beach Boys hits in the early 80s were both older properties. We saw the Beach Boys medley single there, which was, pieces of older songs kind of pieced together. And for 10 Years of Harmony, Come Go With Me was released as the lead single from the MIU album. And that was about it, really. 10 Years of Harmony itself, Sunshine Dream, my videos on both of those, didn't really catch on. The audience seemed to be embracing the Beach Boys as a nostalgia act. Indeed, most of the songs they were doing in concert by the early 80s were oldies. They were still, seems like a pretty successful live draw, but people weren't really interested in hearing those new songs like Going On and stuff like that. They wanted the more nostalgic stuff. Maybe Brian Wilson was onto something when he conceived this as a classic rock cover album. Could be. Some of these songs kind of have a legacy. Mike Love tinkered with the title song for his 12 Sides of Summer album, a video I wanted to get to this summer, but ultimately didn't. This will be on for next summer. Here it's weirdly retitled Keepin' Summer Alive on some of the digital stuff. On the album it still is the in the title, but others omit that article. When Girls Get Together pops up on Feel Flows. There was both an instrumental version and also a new mix. This is the small set, it only has the new mix. And the closing track, Endless Harmony, which was dug out of the vaults. It was originally 10 Years Harmony and kind of redone there. One of the songs that was older and made new again. That gave us the title for the Endless Harmony documentary and soundtrack album. Here's an original 1998 one seen here. But really Going On is probably the only song that is still somewhat popular. It's on a lot of greatest hits compilations and stuff. I like Going On a lot. I kind of wish they'd done more with it, but again, no one really seemed to think it resonated enough to keep it in the live set, and I don't think anyone's going to be requesting it at a concert. A fascinating thing about this album is that we do have a contemporaneous live document. The 2002 CD, Live at Nebworth 1980, was recorded during the tour for this album, and this is a very fun album because it has 6 Beach Boys on it. The 3 Wilsons, Mike, Al, and Bruce. But interestingly, even though they did several songs from this album in that concert, only 2 were kept for the album release, Keepin' the Summer Alive and School Days. So I think that's kind of interesting that Some of Your Love and Santa Ana Winds and whatnot were all omitted. I know Living with a Heartache was in the live set for a time, and that was kind of booted out pretty quickly. So again, even the live material at the time really wasn't embracing this album. So it could be bad timing because the audience wants something more nostalgic. It could be the disorganized structure of the album or the too many cooks aspect of the production. Or it could just be that the audience at the time, and maybe even today, can't really find a good song to sink their teeth into. I don't know, but honestly, Keepin' the Summer Alive is a pretty fun album. Yeah, it's random. Yeah, I always think of it as the picture of mediocrity, because everything on here is certainly listenable, but I agree that there's no real huge standouts going on, and Santa Ana Winds are my favorites, but they're definitely ones that don't compete with some of their major singles. But in the end, it's a fun little time capsule. It's an interesting look into where the Beach Boys were and kind of what they were doing. And I think if it had been received more positively, we would have had a great studio follow-up instead of having to wait 5 years for Beach Boys 85. What are your thoughts on Keepin' the Summer Alive? Do you have this album? Please post some of your favorite 70s and 80s Beach Boys song titles below, and we'll see you next time for a review of 50 Big Ones. So long, my friends. Go out and keep the summer alive.